I would like to welcome you to Connection versus Collision. Where do we go from here? Community Forum in partnership with Love Akron and the 100 Black Men of Akron. My name is Michael Irby. I am the president of the 100 Black Men of Akron Incorporated. Our mission is to improve the quality of life within our community and enhance educational economic opportunities for all Americans. I would like to acknowledge our leadership team, our executive board. We have Tony Grimes, we have E. Lash, James Sneed, and Travis Johnson, and Tom People. Mentoring is our cornerstone of our organization. We mentor youth in grades 4th grade through 12th. Our leadership academy also now is a part of a new program here in Akron that was created by Judge Hamilton, the Compass program, which serves age 18 to 26. And we're so happy to be a part of that. Now, also, I would like to reach out to as many men as possible that may be on this show tonight. We're always looking for men that are willing to have a passion to give back to the community and also serving our youth. You can reach the 100 Black Men at 100BOMAI.org. Or you can reach us at our office at 330-329-8042. Now I'd like to turn it over to our host tonight, who's going to be our moderator, who is our Vice President of Administration, Mr. E. Lash.
Good evening, Coach. Thank you for that warm introduction. And I want to say thank you and welcome to everyone who is joining us this evening. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with Love Akron and 100 Black Men as we engage in this very important discussion and dialogue with some very important, engaging individuals in our community. And we're actually focusing on education this month. As you know, Mayor Dan Horgan has appointed a racial task force to study various elements in our community. And those 5 task force priorities are education, housing, healthcare, criminal justice, and workforce development. And because this is a very special month, because this is actually Black History Month, and we're going to focus on education. So we actually brought some trailblazers within their own right to have this discussion this evening. And I'm going to actually take the opportunity to introduce them, if you will. Our first guest is going to be Mr. Rick Kellar. Mr. Rick Kellar is the president of the PEG Foundation, and he is also president of the Talmadge Board of Education. We also have a pleasure of having Dr. Sandy Womack, who is not a stranger to many of you. He is the area superintendent for Region 3 in the Columbus City Schools, and we actually are very honored to have these gentlemen with us this evening. Good evening, gentlemen. How are you? Thank you for joining.
Good evening. How are you, Brother Lars?
And I actually am very honored to be with you all this evening, and I think that both of you have a lot to contribute, especially as it relates to the topic that we're going to discuss this evening related to education. And as you know, education has, as far as the community overall throughout the country, due to COVID, has taken somewhat of a hit because our students aren't necessarily in the classroom. And I'd like to kind of start off by getting some of your perspectives as it relates to the COVID and the pandemic and education. If you don't mind, Mr. Kellar, we can actually start with you.
Yeah, sure. No, thanks. I appreciate being included tonight, and hats off to the other folks. Kemp Boyd, Pastor Coach Kemp Boyd told me, he's like, hey, we got a heavy hitter panel tonight. And I'm like, well, then why am I on it, right? And I just have to laugh, but I appreciate being part of this. And I love the work that Love Akron and all y'all do. So for us, we're a near suburban district to Akron. We had just finished a whole host within the school district, some building. So we had this just unique moment in time to have a lot of extra space. So it enabled us to employ a hybrid model to education, or to stay close to our kids. And it was just really wild luck. Good leadership team, good, enough resources to do it. And we know that not every district is in that situation. And Talmadge economically isn't necessarily a top tier district in Ohio in terms of resources. We kind of hit it, our building program, just at a lucky moment, but we have a lot more resources than a lot of other districts. And, as a foundation president, we do focus on education. We also focus on mental health. And we know that, the actual COVID pandemic, the dangers that it poses to the frontline workers, from janitors to teachers or kids, families, my daughter's a nurse. It's significant, but there's also a mental health aspect to this that we also view as very important. And we think about, once we get through the curves of COVID, there's going to be a residual impact for folks that didn't have the opportunity to be in a classroom, that were languishing by themselves at home, and that sometimes their situations are even more exacerbated, made worse by a pandemic. And it's work that we just all have to lean into as a community. So it's been a challenge, and so much of the work, I think, that you can't just talk anymore, right? Whether it's racial equity or health or whatever it is, it's got to be like, hey, don't talk about it. We want to see what you're going to do about it. And we're hoping, as I hope the places that I work and I represent, we're doing that.
Sure.
So thanks.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Womack, we're going to actually go to you, because I know that you actually represent a larger district. And if you don't mind kind of sharing, I don't know exactly how many students are in your district. I'm sure you don't mind sharing that, but I'm sure it's on a much grander scale than probably where we reside in Akron or even Talmadge. So if you can speak to that, I would appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you, Mr. Lash, and thank you, 100 Black Men of Akron, as well as Love Akron, for this opportunity. As you see, I'm at my apartment down here in Columbus. I'm not at home, but ultimately, Columbus City Schools serves about 50,000 students. So on March 13th, we were devastated in regards to hopes that we would be able to return back to school in maybe April. April came, May came, June came. School was out. And once again, we were still not able to return. So what we had to do was pivot immediately in order to go to an online learning platform. And thank Dr. Dixon, Mayor Ginther, and some of the people here in Columbus collectively who came together in order to provide Chromebooks for all of our students in order to participate in blended learning. And it was brand new for everybody. The majority of our teachers were traditional teachers. They had taught in person in classroom. And so we had to find a way to go to an online platform in order to educate our students. We're a high poverty district as well, as many of the urban big eights are. And it made it kind of difficult. Blended learning has not been apropos or optimal for many of our students. And as the gentleman said earlier, the social emotional learning concerns of students not being able to socialize with their peers became very difficult. Right now, we're in the process of returning students back to school. On February 1st, we brought students in pre-K through 5 back, those who have critical needs and special education, as well as our career and technical education students in a hybrid model. And it has been difficult just due to the fact of, you have several staff members who are very concerned about their own health. And students, in regards to attendance and things of that nature, internet connectivity, all types of things that we hadn't thought about. COVID became, as Senator Sherrod Brown said, the great revealer. It revealed things that we recognized were taking place in this country for years, except for we never had a chance to have to sit down and actually look at what was happening. Internet connectivity, access to technology, using a blended learning environment, people who had cell phones but never had to use a computer in this. I wish I had a long time ago. I might be rich by now. But the reality of the situation is a lot of our students struggle with the social emotional concerns, the lack of socialization with their friends. But we've done as best as we can. And I know that blended learning and virtual learning will be a part of our menu forever. I mean, it has changed education. Apropos, we would love to have everybody back, and we're working to do that. The governor's making a huge push for that right now. And we're trying to make sure kids are safe. We try to make sure that there's social distance. We're trying to make sure there are masks, that there are PPE devices, and we can transport students back and forth collectively in a safe fashion. So it has been a unique experience, but as educators, we adapt, adjust, and my friend who's in the Marines said they overcome. So we are trying to do everything we can in order to continue to teach students, because education gives you choices, chances, and options. And students being out of school for an entire year, come March 13th, which is only a few weeks away, it will be an entire year for some students who have now been back in the classroom and trying to use this online platform.
Well, thank you very much. Those are some great answers. And I actually want to throw it's not a curveball at either one of you. It's a very important question, because it's going back to what Mr. Kellar touched upon, and that is the racial equity factor and the disparities that have been exposed during this period. I mean, it's just been astounding. And Dr. Womack, since you actually just kind of pivoting off of your response, can you actually talk to that? And then Mr. Kellar will hear your response after.
Right. Well, in high minority, high economically distressed areas, we found out through the situation with COVID and the pandemic in regards to lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to food, lack of access to economic opportunity, things that we have been seeing in this country for years were exacerbated as a result of what took place with COVID this year. And we're even seeing it now in regards to the distribution of vaccines and people even wanting to come in and take a vaccine. Some of it due to the history in regards to the African Americans and the Tuskegee experiment and other things that have taken place in this country. But it was revealed, the things that took place with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and the marches. All of those are things that I believe James Baldwin said something a long time ago. He says, not everything can be changed, but you cannot change things until you actually face it. And we have to face these realities here in our country. And I just tore up his quote, but ultimately that is what he was talking about. Not everything we face can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And so we have to face the realities of what we've seen in this country historically in regards to the marginalization of people of color. And it has taken place for decades and centuries. And so now I am hoping that we're able to start making some changes with that by enlightening and bringing these things to people's attention so that they can see, like, this didn't just happen yesterday. This is over the course of history. So now how do we make some positive changes in order to turn this around for the students that we serve? Because it has been disproportionately affecting the minority community.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Mr. Kellar, would you mind adding to that?
Yeah, no, Sandy's spot on. And what's remarkable to me as we lean into conversation around systemic historic racism in the country is that this has been a great reveal. And so what do we do now, right? We've got to create, I mean, in case no one on here's noticed, I'm white, grew up in the suburbs, and I can't tell you how many people I know that are friends that I grew up with that I know that had never heard of redlining or had heard of it, but didn't really think, well, it doesn't really, I know that was a thing that used to happen, right? The problem with that conversation is it's great that we're having the conversation, but what are we going to do about it? One of the, and I'm a president of a school board in a suburban district that does not have open enrollment because our town, our city generally, I don't think would support it. But that's an extension of what was historic, what really originated with redlining. If sometimes in politics you hear about gerrymandering, it's actually worse how we school district boundary. Now, if we open enrolled, we're adjacent to Akron Public Schools, and I know Dr. James is going to be on. My guess is some of the students that have resources and could travel might leave that district to come to ours, and I don't know that helps either district. And so there's a serious conversation that we need to have in this country about how we fund school districts, and it's born out of how we create boundaries around our districts. And remarkably, they look a lot like historic redlining that occurred that separated black from white, separated the economies. Like, okay, you're redlined, you can't buy as nice of a home. Well, in Ohio, property taxes are a big driver of education. So it's like a double whammy. And it's, I can't believe I got right into this, but I get fired up about it and I'm in a suburban district and I'm on a school board, and I don't have an answer, but the beginning of an answer is, I think what Dr. Womack said is, we got to have that conversation. You got to face it. Like, hey, we can go show up at a protest, but that makes folks feel good, but we need to have that conversation in a school board meeting. We need to have that conversation at the General Assembly about how we can overcome that historic racism that's embedded in a system. I don't think our school board's racist in Talmadge at all, but we are part of perpetuating those divisions, and they need to be addressed.
Sure. I appreciate both of your responses. And tonight we also have the distinct honor and privilege of having Dr. David James, who is the Superintendent of Akron Public Schools. Welcome, Dr. James. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
And as you hear, we've been having a great conversation thus far about some of the issues. We started off with COVID and how it's affected many students across the country, even here in our district. And Mr. Kellar and Dr. Womack have kind of contributed to their thoughts. But if you have any thoughts related to those questions, please share them with us, if you don't mind.
Well, I think we've all suffered through and are continuing to suffer through this COVID piece. I know about 5 years ago, we started our one-to-one technology program. So all of our students have Chromebooks. And, similar to Columbus, we flipped really quickly in March of last year, to this virtual environment. And we had already, started a online portal for a lot of virtual tools for our students. So many of them had some exposure, to that online environment. But we found really early on that a lot of students had these other needs that can be barriers to their education. So, we tried to work through, phone bank where people could call, parents could call, students could call, help with homework or any other issues they were having, partnering with some of our local mental health providers like Red Oak and others to have access to our students. But it's been very difficult. We have seen some of the grades of students, decline. But we're, again, like our sister districts, particularly in the Ohio 8, trying to get a path forward to bringing our kids back to in-person learning. And just as was referenced by Dr. Womack before, we're under pressure from the governor's office to return. And we've started some work on February 1st as well with some of our struggling students, and are really trying to phase it in because it is difficult logistically with 21,000 kids to get everything in line. So when they come back, we can hit the ground running on, their academic recovery. And that's really what this is all about.
Sure. And that's actually, I saw some of the comments in the news coverage related to the governor's comments last week. And Dr. James, we're going to actually get into that because we're going to have a special segment with you by yourself. But I want to throw the question out to Mr. Kellar and Dr. Womack related to urban education. What do you feel we as a community, communities across the state can do to improve the education within our urban sectors?
I would just say, Dr. James, it's nice to see your background, man. At least you're at home, brother. You got some nice pictures in the background with Jimi Hendrix and look like, yeah,
I'll comment on that later.
Yeah, I know I got off task, but I saw the picture. Looked like you got Billie Holiday back there too. So
Yeah.
I mean, I'm stuck in this apartment down here. I'm telling my wife I need to be home. But ultimately, going back to urban education, one of the things I think we have to do is recognize that it takes a community. And it takes the schools, the families, and the communities working together collectively in order for everybody to work on how we can get to this student, because there's so many different things, whether it be the healthcare industry, whether it be economic drivers, whether it is the family itself, whether it's the churches. I think we all have to come together collectively and wrap ourselves around the whole child and try to find out what will it take, case by case, school by school, neighborhood by neighborhood, in order to find a way to impact and ensure that teaching and learning takes place and that the kids are safe and secure. We're having a lot of adults who are dealing with a lot of trauma, but if the community can come together collectively and everybody played a role, we're not asking people to go outside of their lane. If I'm a hospital, I need the hospital to do the work of a hospital. If I am an economic driver, then we need those economic drivers to do the work of economic drivers. But ultimately, it's going to take everybody coming together collectively, mental health service agencies working collectively within the schools, externally and internally, in order to try to find a way to reach the kids, because they're malleable. And if we don't get this generation right here, I can only imagine what it's going to be like for the next generation, because they've had to adapt on the fly. So I would just say people coming together collectively, doing what they do best, working with a common interest, with a common goal. How do we get these kids across the finish line? And how do we get them to graduate? Because we know that education is economic development. And so how do we do that? And that will take everybody, just like it was you guys today. It's going to take all of us.
Absolutely. Mr. Kellar?
Yeah, Sandy, he's spot on, and the tactics of doing that isn't always easy, but to get people to care, whether you live in that urban district or you're in the area, you have to understand that one, there's the issue of what's right. We've got to fix that history, and it won't happen overnight, but we got to get at it. We got to put our shoulder to the wheel and get at it. The second part of that is well, then how do you do it? You show up and you care. And if it's one kid at a time, one moment at a time, we're not asking folks well, yeah, we are in a way, like, to revolutionize like the future for these kids. We're my day job outside of the schoolwork is at the foundation, and we partner with Akron Public and through the LeBron James Family Foundation. And, it's a great partnership for us, because previously I had a board that most of the money we gave or granted went into this to districts that, quite honestly, didn't need the resources as much as Akron did. And we had this moment in time where we realized, building a stadium in a place, and the folks that are from around here will say, in a place like Hudson, Ohio, hey, they need it, it's great. But what we really need to do is build a future for those third graders that are falling behind that are in Akron Public, because at the end of the day, we're going to need that generation to grow up in our area and make our county and the vicinity of Akron where we live great. And we need it. And so I think it's just looking for those opportunities to not talk about it, but do it. And
Yeah, thank you. I want to actually thank you, Mr. Kellar, and Dr. Womack for joining this conversation. If you don't mind hanging out, we'll bring you back when I actually have a conversation with Dr. James 101. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Dr. James, it's more than an honor to actually be able to sit down and have a discussion with you. I know you have upcoming retirement that is pretty public. And I would like to just say thank you on behalf of the Akron community for your service and your work in serving our children throughout the years.
Thank you.
Absolutely, you're very welcome. Well, I guess I want to start off by asking, with all the work that you've done, and we can look around the city and see exactly with the new CLCs that have been built and things that have been done. Do you feel, looking over your career, that you have done all that you could do within the city of Akron, Akron Public Schools?
No, there's always more that we can do as leaders, but during our leadership journey, there's always something that gets in the way, whether it's a COVID pandemic. Some years ago, it was the Ebola virus, it was 9/11, or a stock market crash. There's a whole lot of different outside factors that impact our work, and you just try to do the best job you can, moving through and trying to help the kids and the overall city itself.
When you actually are when you're participating in sports, one of the famous sayings is, "I left it on the field." What is it that you would actually say that you wish you could have done? If there's one thing that you could just share with us that you wish you could have done during your tenure, what was that one thing that you wish you could have accomplished? I mean, you've
Oh,
done.
there's so many things I wish I could have done. Some years ago, I wanted to start retool our whole. We were having some issues with Akron Digital Academy that we sponsored. I wanted to go in a different direction, and the idea was to call it APS Virtual, believe it or not, and it was to really hone in on this online learning piece where we could be a resource for not just our students, but even for some of the students who are homeschooled, to provide them some resources. And that never really got off the ground. It just wasn't the right time, and there have been many things that I wanted to do, but all the stars didn't line up. And though we flipped to that virtual environment now, if I would have had the wherewithal to actually see that idea through, it was just I didn't have anyone to lead it. We might be in a different situation with the pandemic and online learning. I think we would have learned a lot of lessons. It's kind of like Martin Luther King Jr. when he gave that speech at Oberlin College many years ago, and he was talking about the novel by Washington Irving, Rip Van Winkle, and Dr. King said, "Don't sleep through a revolution." And so I've always tried to keep that in my head is, there are many things that revolutionize our country, and they're not all bad, but don't sleep through it. Be prepared for what comes after that revolution. I think right now, with all of the things that have been laid bare through the pandemic, the issue last summer, with all the protests and the issue with George Floyd, it just laid bare many of the inequities in our society. And we have to really, work on that. And we have been working on it, but it's just now it's so critical, in terms of making sure kids are getting their education and we can right, many of the things that are wrong and inequitable, not just in our organizations, respective organizations, but in our society as a whole.
Absolutely. Now, you actually mentioned some of the inequities that have been uncovered. And I know this is associated with the statement, but do you feel in this society, especially after the year that we've gone through, because I would actually categorize the year that we've gone through as being rather traumatic on many levels. Do you feel that it is possible? I know a lot of the children have actually witnessed and seen a lot through television and in the community. Do you feel it's possible to overcome some of these situations and inequities that have been unearthed?
I think it is, but that's, it's kind of like, people who raise orchids, the humidity of the air has to be right. The temperature it's constant work. So it's never going to be finished, I think, but it's going to be constant work. And how do we change, the thoughts that, people have about each other? I mean, we're all citizens of this country and we have to learn how to work together. And I think most people have that concept, but as we've seen, that's kind of broken down to think that the country belongs to a certain group of people, but there are other people who toyed the land, not necessarily because they wanted to, because they were forced to. And, a lot of those things, the whole thing about redlining, there's a book that, I looked at, The Color of Law, and it talked about some of that redlining, which is why I ended up growing up in zip code 44104 in Cleveland, because back then when my parents bought a house, they couldn't get a house in certain neighborhoods and were steered towards that one. So we can make progress. I don't know if we'll ever overcome it, but it's going to just take a lot of constant work.
Sure, sure. And before we actually go to a break, I know that earlier in our conversation, we were talking about COVID, and it seems like you can't escape TV, radio, whatever mode of medium that's out there without hearing about the pandemic and the effects that it's had on our society. And I know that it's had some effects here in our community. Do you have any advice or any thoughts as to the impact that it's had on our students here in Akron?
Well, we know that there's been a lot of learning loss, and I'll just talk, there's so many areas where it's impacted people. Some people have had relatives die in their family or extended family or neighbors or friends. Others, it's ruined their senior year last year, and the senior year this year probably won't look that much different than last year. So there's a lot of social emotional things that are going on with kids. And I agree we have to get our kids back to school, but I also have 4,000 full and part-time employees that I have to worry about, and everyone is scared. Lots of people are scared about, whether coming back or whether they're going to be able to get the vaccine, out in the general public. So there are so many ways that has impacted our students, and it's going to take them a while to recover. And so I charge my staff with working on, that recovery plan so we can make sure we can address all of the needs that students have. And they're more, than just the academic pieces. It's also a lot of the mental health issues, and, they're going to need a lot of counseling, and then a lot of many more ways to burn off a lot of that steam and frustration that they've gone through over, almost 12 months now.
Sure. If you had the opportunity to sit down across the table for a cup of coffee with one of these parents whose children or whose child has fallen behind and has suffered the effects of this pandemic over the last year, what type of advice would you give them?
A lot of times, I grew up in a family where, my parents just didn't, accept failure, and it's like, we have to find sometimes small ways to reassure our children and let them know that things are going to be all right, and let them know that in life, you will run through difficulty, but there's also the other side of that difficulty. And so all I could say for, to a parent of a kid that's struggling is that things are going to get back to a new normal. It may be a little different than what we had in the past, but we're doing everything possible to put the tools and the supports in place so that, we can make sure that our kids are going to be successful, no matter what happens. And sometimes that takes a little time, and it may not look like that's happening, but it actually is. We have a ton of dedicated educators working collaboratively with our unions, our teachers. We've served over 2 million meals since this pandemic started, grab and go food bags from our building. So we're working hard to make sure we can get through this, and we will.
That's a great answer. Dr. James, before we actually let you go, I know that you're going to be retiring in a few months, and a lot of people have seen you in and throughout the community over a number of years, but really haven't gotten to know you as the man. They just see he's Mr. Superintendent. Can you share some fun facts about you as a person, and what kind of plans do you have post-retirement?
Well, Carla Davis and I are going, she works for the library. We're going to be cruise ship singers. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know what I'll be doing. I'll let the good Lord help me out with that. I think it takes some reflection, some prayer, and not really worry about it so much. And I think that's a good way to transition, out and not really jump into something immediately. I've never really done that. But, I've given, almost 30 years of my life to Akron Public Schools. And it's really strange, thinking about, not going to work. I'm not having, some kind of, syndrome or issue about it, but it's going to feel different not having to call a snow day. And that'll actually make me feel happy because it's never the right decision for half of the people,
Yeah.
But I don't know. Just being able to relax. I don't think people realize is that 365 days out of the year, you could be, on at dinner with your wife, and the phone will ring. And you have to have that phone with you all the time because, it could be a fire at a building, it could be any kind of emergency. And it'll be nice to be able to disconnect from that.
Sure.
And not, you're constantly on the run and constantly worried about this, that, and everything else. And, I guess it's really, I'm almost 60 years old, so it's too late for a midlife crisis. So I'm not going to have that. I didn't have one of those, but it'll be nice to be able to relax with my wife and, we're empty nesters. So there's just a lot of things, I won't have to be so concerned about, but I will say this, I'll always be concerned about the success of Akron Public Schools and our kids and the success of this community.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. James, I want to thank you for your time this evening. I want to actually say to you that you are viewed as a true leader and your contribution to this community is more than appreciated. I wish you well in your retirement, and I thank you for everything that you've done for our kids. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And now, thank you all for hanging with us thus far. We have one last guest, and we have Dr. N.J. Akbar, who I have the pleasure of interviewing this evening. He is the president of the Akron Public School Board, and he is the vice president of diversity and inclusion with Kent State University. And we're going to be able to interview him and get some of his perspectives on the future of Akron Public Schools. Dr. Akbar, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, thank you very much. And I'm actually the associate vice president.
Associate, I'm sorry. I'm giving you additional titles. How are you?
Yeah. I'm doing well.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have some feedback. Let me see here. Yeah, we want to thank you for joining us this evening and taking the time out to join us for this very important conversation, and congratulate you on your election to become president of the school board. And we just actually had Dr. James talk about what he's done, his tenure, etc. So I would like to talk to you about the future of the Akron Public Schools and where you kind of see this going after Dr. James retires.
Thank you very much for that question. We are very blessed here in Akron and Akron Public Schools to have steady leadership here. 13 years as a superintendent is virtually unheard of. And we are doing the very best we can to find someone who's going to, be our next leader. We as a board have sat down and did talked about our strategy and our vision for the district for the future, and we come up with our advanced APS plan 3 and 3, and that plan is what we are hoping that next leader will guide us in the district in moving us forward. And so that plan includes a focus on academic achievement, focus on equity, which is actually embedded throughout all 3 pieces. And then the third component is engagement. And so we want to make sure that we're doing a better job of engaging all of our stakeholders in a way that is going to be beneficial to them. And so those 3 things will be guiding us. We are currently under the superintendent search. And so you can go to our website, akronschools.com, and look at the updates for the superintendent search. Myself, on behalf of the board, have written, I think, 2 updates thus far, and we will be providing another update as well very soon about where we are with the status of our superintendent search. So we see a bright future for Akron Public Schools, and we are desperately hoping to have a new leader in time to spend some time with Dr. James before he goes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And there's that feedback again. I'm sorry. One of the things that you stated, and one of the things we've asked all of our guests this evening, is the word that has been kicked around for the last year. That's COVID. And I know that the pandemic has been throughout the newspapers. I know that you have interjected some comments over the months as far as the return of our students, student athletes, et cetera, and their participation. Can you share, since you are on the board, can you share, what are your thoughts from a board perspective as it relates to some of the effects that COVID has had on many of our students in Akron?
Yes. So first, COVID has changed all of our lives. It's upended what we consider normal, and it's created a new normal for us. We all have experienced this together. And one of the things that we've learned more than anything is the importance of flexibility. That's something that we as a board have been working with, and as well as Love Akron, hopefully expresses this probably every day. But we've been looking at how do we extend more grace to individuals, because this is a traumatic experience for all of us, and it's going to take all of us to make it through. And so the impact of COVID has been tremendous in every aspect of the district and each and every one of our individual lives. But the thing I'll end with is that we have to focus on three things. One, we have to keep the students at the center of everything that we do. Their future and the progress that they have to make has to be the cornerstone of everything we do. And with that, in order to do that, we have to keep safety. As Dr. James mentioned, a lot of people, including our students and our parents and our staff, are fearful about what this virus has done and ravaged our community and our country and our world in many ways. And so we have to do what's best to make sure that everyone is safe. We live in a very vulnerable community. We have, as I heard earlier today, the result of redlining and other things, we have communities that are specifically targeted by this virus, not just because it's a virus, but because of the way in which we have to live. Many of us have to live in very close quarters and in housings that have been predetermined before we even, many of us was even born. And so we have to deal with that as well. And so because we know also that many people live in intergenerational housing, and COVID specifically has a greater impact, a lethal impact on those that are in the upper ages, we have to be sensitive to our staff living with family members, parents, grandparents, as well as our students. And the last thing I'll say is that in order to do all of this, we can't forget about those things, but we cannot also forget and brush off the fact that there is social determinants of health, and that there is impact on the way in which Black and Latinx and immigrant families are treated when they do seek care. And so we can't just make decisions that just look good on paper. We have to consider the people in their lives and the way that things are impacted, and not think that we live in a fairy tale world.
Absolutely. I can really appreciate your comments there. One of the questions I want to ask you before we bring everyone back in is, you've built a career on diversity and inclusion, and in looking at and hearing some of the interviews that you've done over time, you have really emphasized equity. You have emphasized that in your leadership, when you were elected to the board, now that you're board president. Can you actually speak to that? Because we've talked about some of the disparities that have been uncovered throughout this pandemic. And can you actually speak to that as far as the Akron public school system?
Yeah, thank you very much. Equity is, in my mind, the thread that should be embedded in every facet of our society. Everything that we do should come from an equity mindedness, as well as we should also come from an equity perspective and lens. And so the way we see the world, and when we look at things through an equity lens, is much different than the way that I think most people see the world. You see the impact of your decisions, the impact of the programs and policies and practices that you implement, and you have to see that adverse impact on individuals and the way in which they can progress in society. And if you can't see that, then there's no way for you to have true equity. And so I think Dr. Womack mentioned this, and it's very important. You first have to be able to name it. You can't walk around and say that we live in a post-racial society because Barack Obama was elected the 44th president of the United States. And so now everything in the world is great. You also can't walk around and think that we live in a neoliberalist perspective and ideals. And so I don't see color, because what you're saying is you really don't see me. You don't really see the experiences and the impact that it has on me. And so really, equity is about giving people what they need, not giving everyone the same thing. It's like food. I use food as a great example. One, I'm a little chubby and I love food. Two, I think it's something everybody can understand. So if you make spaghetti, if you live in Cincinnati, you live in DC, you live in Detroit, you live in Akron, are you going to make spaghetti the exact same way in each one of those places? No. If you live on Thurmont, you might make spaghetti different than your neighbor. Just like if you live on any other street, you live over off Arlington. So you have to give people what they need. And you might think that, oh, spaghetti is spaghetti. In the end, it is. But the way in which I taste it, and if it's good to me, might be different. And so if you think about it in that way, that you're giving people what they need, not necessarily what you think they need, or giving everyone the same thing, it just dilutes the impact and what happens in the end.
Thank you, Dr. Akbar. I appreciate your comments. And at this time, we're going to actually bring in all of our guests, and just to Dr. Womack, Rick Kellar, and Dr. James, if available. We actually really appreciate the time that you guys spent with us this evening. The information and your knowledge that you shared was really invaluable. And I think that really impactful when it comes to a conversation such as this regarding education. So before we actually leave, and this is the last question of the evening, I want to give each of you an opportunity just to kind of share something related to education that you can actually share with our community participants and those watching as relates to how you see education within the next 5 to 10 years and how we can actually all work for a better education in our community. If you don't mind keeping your comments to maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds, I'd appreciate it. We can actually start with Mr. Kellar.
Thanks. Yeah. So next 3 to 5 years, I'll go the next 3 to 5 months. I think we have to exercise a lot of patience as we emerge from this pandemic, and have patience with each other and with the kids that we're trying to teach, because there's kids that are kind of come storming out of this. Teachers come storming out of this gangbusters, can't wait to get out of quarantine and get back around people. And then there's going to be a lot of people that aren't used to being around people. And so I think we have to exercise a lot of patience with each other to get back to where we need to be, and then to be able to be somewhere 3 to 5 years. The other thing I wanted to say, I'm stealing a line from a close friend of mine, one of my brothers, but something Dr. Akbar just said is it's notice my color, just don't judge me for it. And I thought that's one of the most revealing things that I'd heard. And it's different spaghetti on different streets, right? It makes sense, and respect it. Don't judge for it. I appreciate being part of this group. Like they said earlier, esteemed panel, and I don't know why I'm on it, but I appreciate being here, and thank you for your work tonight too.
Thank you, Mr. Kellar. We appreciate your comments. We appreciate it. Dr. Womack, if you don't mind.
I would just like to say that thank you for this opportunity. I've always believed that to deny yourself access to education is to deny yourself access to income. That's why so many people across the country say get a good education, whatever that may be. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, what COVID did is actually become a catalyst for change in regards to education, because there's a lot of things that we needed to do. And I think now that we will have a menu of a variety of different services, as Dr. James has said, where some kids can learn virtually, some kids can learn blendedly, some kids can be on campus, and we as educators have prepared in order to deal with the changing transitions and the populations who say, hey, blended learning actually works for me. I like a hybrid model. Hey, I like the one-on-one. I need to be in class, or I like the virtual model. So we'll have to increase our portfolio and our options for those students. The final thing I'd like to say is that, we've always focused on reading, writing, speaking, and most importantly, critically thinking. But I think we have to take on the innovation and get the ideas of the youth and find out what are they want to get into, because now some are making, hundreds of thousands of dollars playing games, or they're influencers and they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars as influencers. So, the next 3 to 5 years will be very interesting. And just looking forward to having the opportunity to work with students to see what we can do collectively in order to make sure they have choices, chances, and options that education provides.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dr. Womack. Dr. Akbar?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. So I see us having a clear awakening to have an impetus of meeting students where they are, meeting families where they are, meeting communities where they are, and actually putting the magnifying glass on our communities and our students and providing them the little intricate pieces of the puzzle that we're not seeing before. And so we're able to provide that. And I'll also say those of us who are doing this work will have to continue to have courage and fight the resistance. In the words of John Lewis, we have to make good trouble. And doing this work will receive you unfaithful enemies and unfaithful friends, but you have to keep going. And the work isn't for the faint of heart either. So if you are a little bit shaky on criticism, then you might want to move out the way. And so I think that we all are doing the best we can to push forward. And that's what I see in the next 5 years.
Thank you, Dr. Akbar. And last, we have the honor and privilege of having Dr. James. And again, Dr. James, thank you for your service. And last comments are yours.
I think he's on mute.
I think you're on mute. Yes.
There we go. Usually I leave that up to Mr. Akbar to not be unmuted, but it's I agree with my colleagues wholeheartedly. I think the issue is, we're in the opportunity business, and there's a lot of things that our kids, I think Dr. Womack referenced it, that they can be doing. And there are things that are foreign to us, and we need to be open because it's their future. It's not our past. And that's really a forward-looking vision of education in our community is really what's needed because the kids deserve it.
Thank you, Dr. James. We wish you well in your retirement, and hopefully we'll see you around the community.
Thank you.
Have a great night. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We appreciate your time. Hopefully you've gained something throughout this conversation. We thank our panelists. And right now we're going to bring in Coach Kemp A, who will close out the evening. Have a great evening. Thank you.
Hey, awesome. Fantastic. Awesome job, Brother Lash. Our esteemed panel of guests. Thank you so much for being with us. Man, this is just great. There's so much I wrote down, I took away from it, even with COVID being the great revealer, right? I loved how we said, man, we got to come together collectively as a community. And this is the one thing I love. It says, man, and I'm saying another quote another way. It says, you can't change what you don't acknowledge. And so connection versus collision, where do we go from here? where we are presenting practical discussions that can help to push our community forward. This is why we do what we do. I want to share something. I got an email this week, and they got an email inviting them to come and enter into this. And the response I got back was this. I just want you to listen. It says, how about this? Get kids back in school now. Quit dividing us by race and focus on teaching kids in person. Listen, this is not a divisive program. We're not a divisive organization. Neither is 100 Black Men. We're doing everything that every panelist said tonight. All we're trying to do is present a platform to hold practical discussions to help push our community forward. What we don't acknowledge, we can't change. So we have to acknowledge these things that are going on in our community. So what? So now we can push and work towards changing them. Thank you so much again for being with us. Thank you for our esteemed panel of guests. Thank you for Brother Lash for moderating, doing us such a great job. Thank you to all of our partners. Thank you to 100 Black Men of Akron and partnering with us. And thank you for all of our sponsors. Thank you for our team behind the scenes that helped us produce this. And remember, if you don't do anything else, make sure that you love Akron. Good night, everyone, and we'll see you next time.